Hey, how's it going guys? It is Olivier, and today as always I'll share with you my full investing portfolio update for the month of July 2024. The main particularity that you will find this month is the fact that I've been adding the different ETFs that I have in my portfolio so you can have a better overview of my overall stock market portfolio. But first, as always, we'll take a look at what are the different individual companies as well as what are the different ETFs that I have in my portfolio, followed by the sectoral distribution of it. And then we will finish by what are the different transactions that I've made over the past month of June 2024. But it is important to understand that over the past month, I have made a few transactions to be able to gain more liquidity in my portfolio, to be able also to pay the different moving fees that are coming in July. Now, when we take a look at the technology sector, we can see that I have some of the biggest GAFAM in it, which are Apple, Meta, Google, and Amazon, which all represents a certain portion of my total assets. Plus, I also have a certain stake of my portfolio in the Tesla company, as well as a little portion of it in the Rumble company, which is a direct and a small competitor of YouTube. But in total, over the past 3 years, we can see that the two companies that have been performing super well are Meta and Google, with some total return of more than 100%. Now, jumping out to the energy sector, we can find that I hold both Enbridge and Pembina that are giving all some great and massive dividends to their shareholders. Nevertheless, over the past 3 years, we can see that while Pembina has been performing quite well, on its side, Enbridge hasn't been doing that great with a return of only about 5%. But this doesn't include the gigantic dividend that they are giving to their shareholders every single quarter. Now, when we are going into the financial sector, we can see that I've trimmed a certain portion of the Canadian banks that I held in my portfolio, and I've kept only TD as well as the insurance company Manulife. On its side, TD hasn't been performing that great over the past couple of months and years with some return of less than 8%. But on the upper end, Manulife over the last 3 years has been doing fantastic with some return of over 80%. When we take a glance at the communication sector, we can see that I have two of the three largest communication companies in Canada, which are Bell and TELUS. Nevertheless, even if both of these companies don't represent a huge portion of my total assets, you can see that both of them haven't been doing that great with some return of less than 20% each. On a brighter note, we can see that this hasn't been the case for my consummation company Couche-Tard, that has been up by over 50% since the last 3 years. In terms of my materials company Savaria, you can see that I am currently up by over 30% on the average price that I've paid for this company. Then in terms of the real estate investment trust company that I hold in my portfolio, which is Raocan, you can see that it represents a certain portion of my total assets, and it is currently up by close to 40% of unrealized profit. And finally, for the last single company that I hold in my portfolio, which is 5N+, you can see that I am currently up by over 26% on the initial price that I've paid for it. Now, when we are jumping to the ETF section, you can see that the largest one in my portfolio by far is the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, which is an ETF that is basically tracking the largest 500 companies on the American market. And in total, this represents over 15% of my total assets, and it has been up by over 30% since the last couple of years. After, you can see that I also have a global ETFs in the form of the iShares Core Equity ETF. This one is pretty much one of the best ETFs for Canadians to include every companies that you can find on the stock market. Nevertheless, at the moment, with a ponderation of only about 2% of my total assets, I am working on increasing this percentage to at least 10% of it. After, we can find that the third ETF that I have in my portfolio is the iShares S&P TSX ETF that represents a little bit higher than 2.5% of my assets. We then find the famous SCG ETF, or the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. On its side, this fund is tracking the largest and the best dividend payers in the US market, and it currently represents close to 2.5% of my total assets. We then have the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF, which is tracking great dividend growth companies on the US market, and on its side, this ETF represents close to 3% of my total assets. And we then finish with my liquidity ETF, which is the cash ETF, or the Global High Interest Savings Account ETF. This one is pretty much my liquidity reserve for all my different projects, notably for my real estate projects. It is why over the past month, I've been selling over $10,000 of this ETF, notably to be able to pay the different heat pumps. So in total, you can see that my current investing portfolio currently worth about $169,000, which currently represent an unrealized profit of over $46,000 or about 38%. In the future, my two main objectives will be to be able to have a better balance between the different ETFs that I have in my portfolio and the different stocks that I have in it. And I will also want to diminish the position that I have in individual stocks that surpass over 10% of my total assets. Here you can see a global picture of the different ETFs that I have in my portfolio with the objectives to add more different international ETFs in it in the near future, as well as to add more cash into the global ETF that I have in it, which is the XEQT ETF. Now, in terms of the sectoral distribution, we can find that the technology sector still represents the largest sector of my total portfolio with more than 36% of my total assets. Then we can find that the ETF sections comes as the second leader with close to 30% of my total assets. And after we can find that the financial sector comes as the third one. After we find the energy sector, then we have the real estate sector, and we have some lower and smaller sectors, so the consumption sector, the communication sector, as well as the materials sector that will come after. In terms of the transactions that I've made over the past month, you can see only the different individual stocks that I've traded during that month, where I've sold a bunch of them. Notably, where I've sold most of the biggest Canadian banks except TD, where I've kept a certain portion of it in my portfolio. And on the 28th of June, I've also decided to add a few shares of Tesla to my overall portfolio. But on your side, if you're looking to discover what is my personal investing strategy for 2024, well, check out the video that's gonna be right over here, and I will see you soon. Peace!